Our guests are all watching, so welcome everyone. My name's Gerald Beyer, Jerry Beyer. I'm the acting director of the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions at the University of British Columbia. And we are co-presenters, co-hosts of this new series, virtual series that is replicating some of the content we would normally offer in what we call our Institute for Future Legislators. And so both ourselves and the team at Ryerson have put on these institutes in summers past, but with this current context, of course, we're not able to do so. Before we begin, though, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we meet today, scattered as we are, on traditional territories of Indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of what we call Canada. So I'm personally on the unceded land of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. Our co-presenters at Ryerson are located on the territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, sorry if I got that wrong, and the Huron-Wendat, which is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, Treaty 13, and the Williams Treaty. But wherever you are, and we've got a little bit of sense of that from our initial poll, I'd ask you to take a moment just to reflect on the privilege of being there and acknowledge personally the peoples on whose land you find yourselves. We should be truly struck, I think, by the scale of debt that Canada owes to Indigenous peoples by the fact that it's almost impossible to inventory the places where we all are, even on a modest meeting of this size. So we should acknowledge that in our own personal settings, and I ask you to do that. So thank you very much for that. So as I said, today is the first in a series of virtual practitioner sessions. When we do the Institute for Future Legislators, we often bring in what we call practitioners, people who have been in the trenches, who've done the work of being in Parliament and provincial legislatures. We can't do that this year with people. We would normally have a lot of other kinds of activities in the person-to-person version of the Institute, but we thought we could try to replicate some of that today. We began the IFL 8 years ago in Vancouver at UBC with the goal of better preparing people for considering a legislative career. And we've had a lot of cohorts go through, and we've had a lot of success with that group. I think that we're talking to a nationwide audience today is a little bit of confirmation, reward for those of us who put in a lot of work, and I speak to the whole teams that have put on IFLs both at Ryerson and at UBC over the years that we're getting a little bit of reward for that. So that's a perfect segue for me to turn it over to the folks at Ryerson to offer their welcome. And so I asked Dean Pam Sugerman to offer her welcome.
Thank you very much, Jerry. I'm really delighted to welcome everyone to the Institute for Future Legislators virtual series, as Jerry mentioned. This is a collaborative product of the Faculty of Arts at Ryerson and the University of British Columbia's Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions. At Ryerson, democracy is at the forefront of our scholarly research and our community engagement, and we see these as very much coming together rather than as separate. The theme of democracy is embedded in the university's new academic plan, the new strategic research plan, and the faculty is home to the Democratic Engagement Exchange under the leadership of John Beebe, whom is here with us today. Also home to the Jaroslawski Democracy Chair, Dr. Sanjay Ruparelia, and I'm pleased to add that in the near future, we will be announcing a Canada Research Chair in Indigenous democracies and a Canada Research Chair in Democracy and Migration. With a particular concern about the economic well-being and the wider experiences of our students. We've also very recently launched a youth worker hub, which is part of a larger project on democracy in the workplace. With a similar focus on youth and democratic participation, Dr. Tracy Rainey and former Member of Parliament, Peggy Nash, have partnered to offer a 4-credit experience-based Women in the House program, which is open to all art students who identify as women. Last summer, in partnership with the UBC Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions, we held our inaugural Institute for Future Legislators Ryerson and it proved to be a huge success. As alluded to earlier, we really regret that we can't offer the program this year, but we are very pleased to offer this new virtual format and to draw on the insights, the expertise, and the advice of our seasoned political practitioners and researchers. And in closing these remarks, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Jerry Beyer and Rebecca Alegria Monrat from, and I'm sorry if I've mispronounced Rebecca's name, from UBC's Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions. And they are our co-hosts for this series. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you, Dean Sugerman. I have the responsibility to explain how some of the tech side of things are going to work here. My name is John Beebe, and for those of you who I've not met before, welcome. For all the folks who are joining us who've been part of the IFL in the past, it's great to have you back. We are going to have a wonderful conversation for the first part, and then bring everyone else in for Q&A at the end. And we're going to use our Zoom chat function for the Q&A. So as the conversation goes on, you come up with questions, feel free to share those directly to Megan Diaz, and you'll be able to chat to her with your question, and then she will call on you during the Q&A to ask your own questions. But I think in the moment, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, I'm hoping that the chat is open to everyone for this moment so people can introduce themselves quickly and just say if you've been involved with the IFL program in the past, how you've come to today, or maybe where you are now. And then during the session, we'll close the overall chat to stay focused on the conversation that's happening, and then open that up for the Q&A at the end. So thank you all, and I'm really looking forward to this inaugural virtual series and the conversations today.
Thank you, John and Dean Sugerman. So I'm going to get out of the way and pass it off to our very capable moderator for today's session. He's going to have a very brief introduction of our panelists, and then has a series of questions to guide through some discussion for that first 45 or so minutes like John described, and then we'll go to the Q&A. So over to you, Ian. Thank you very much. Ian Hanomansing is anchor of The National on CBC Television, has been with CBC Television for many years in various different roles, has helped us at the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions on multiple occasions. We're really grateful to have his participation today. Thank you, Ian. Please take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much. So really honored to be part of this and accepted the invitation for three reasons. One is you mentioned I have been connected not just to this project, but also to UBC's political science department generally. And you guys have always been so generous coming into the studio here at CBC Vancouver. So always happy to help you out when I can. But actually, one of the big reasons I took this invitation is that I have a lot of respect for the two panelists who are here today. And if I've met each of you, it's only been in passing, maybe in this newsroom. So hopefully we're on a first name basis. And if not, then that's just going to be awkward. But anyway, I'd just like to, for those of you who are joining us and watching, hopefully you've read their resumes. They are impressive. I'm not going to go through all of it now, other than to say they both are obviously a long time now former MPs representing two parties in Canada. And Nathan Cullen, if you picture Canada and British Columbia and you look at that huge swath of the northwest corner, that's Skeena-Bulkley Valley, and that's the riding that Nathan Cullen represented for a long time. And just to give you an indication of the way that people there feel about him, I went up to the Smithers area for a couple of short visits in a couple of summers a few years ago. And honestly, I ran into, I would say, at least a dozen people who would say to me when they recognized me, "Have you ever met Nathan Cullen? Do you know who Nathan Cullen is?" So it's always interesting when you go into a riding and you can see how much people in that riding kind of almost treasure their local MP. So that says a lot about what Nathan has done over the years. Between 2012 and 2014, the NDP was the official opposition, and he was the House Leader of the official opposition. So from that perspective, I think will be able to give us lots of insights into the strategies and the concepts of cross-party collaboration. And Lisa Raitt, of course, has seen the House of Commons from both sides as a senior cabinet minister with various portfolios when the Conservatives were in government, and also as a senior member of the opposition. And there's so many things that she's done, which we've seen over the years and have been so impressive. But I got to say, for me, probably, I mean, the one thing that really comes to mind is sitting in this newsroom in Vancouver, watching the Justice Committee of the House of Commons conduct their sessions into the SNC-Lavalin affair, and to watch the cross-examination that Lisa did during that. It was as, riveting, but also meaningful as any sort of courtroom drama, and it was really impressive. So, to both of you, welcome. Thank you very much for doing this. And Lisa, if I may call you Lisa, let me start first by asking you a question that I'll put to Nathan in a moment as well, and that is a definitional one, and that is about cross-party collaboration. How would you define it?
I would say that cross-party, by the way, thank you very much. It's kind words of you, Ian, to say. And I'm quite enjoying your discussion about your haircut from your wife. I thought that was really cute. That you're putting it out there, and so that we're all experiencing the same issues. And she did a great job. She's
Excellent.
A multitasker, so well done. Please give her my regards.
I will pass that on to her, yes.
Thank you, good. It definitely, collaboration across parties, I think it starts with personal connection, and I'll tell you the story. I think part of the reason why I have great comfort discussing matters that are both partisan in nature and personal in nature with Nathan Cullen is because when I was a very fresh, green, right, minted out of the box cabinet minister, Nathan called and said, let's go have lunch or have coffee. And we did. We met in the Confederation building. We met in the little teeny tiny cafeteria. He told me about his twins. I told him about my life and my family. And that was really early on. And it, for lack of a better word, it captured me. I knew that I had somebody I could have a sane word with on the other side and get a meaningful response because I had great respect for who he was, what he did, and where he came from. Partisanship came second. So part of the collaboration has to be that personal connection that MPs must attempt to create amongst one another. It just doesn't happen. You actually have to go out there. It's like networking. You have to go out there and take it upon yourself to do that. And that's why I think collaboration does start with the individual. And the reason why I believe Nathan approached was because he cared greatly about the residents of Skeena-Buckley Valley. And as a member of parliament, he wanted to know the minister in charge of natural resources because he wants to go and be able to have a line of communication with her. And that made absolute sense. So yeah, the people in Skeena-Buckley Valley should be very proud of the work that Nathan did. And he put partisanship aside to connect human to human with a cabinet minister because it would be the better for his constituents.
Nathan?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Ian, for that introduction, and Lisa, very much for those kind words. I want to say that to this group, Lisa stole my answer, so that's terrible, and that happens in all of our classes. I mean, there's what I think about what are the elements that allow for something like collaboration to happen, and I don't know if it's all that different in politics that it is in business, that it is based on the personal. It does require finding some stories or some common ground, as Lisa talked about. We talked about our families. We talked about what comes into this aside from the partisan politics, and including and putting on the table when those partisan interests are at play as well. That oftentimes people want to separate these things out and keep them at a distance and pretend. I had one minister say to me, you know, you might be partisan, but we're not over here. And I thought, oh gosh, this is a hard conversation to have if we all can't agree on the terms of reference even, which is that we all have our constituents that we care about our families, our communities, and our parties, because we have been drawn to one party or another. And that's okay. Partisanship, of course, has gotten a bad rap and I've been interested to watch the various examples across our country during this incredible time. British Columbia, as Ian would know, one of the most rabidly partisan legislatures and places to work, I think has exemplified itself from the Liberals, the Greens, and the NDP in their ability to find some common ground in the midst of a pandemic, put aside the things that they disagree on, and move forward on the important things about keeping people safe. I've seen other legislatures, we see to the south of us, other examples where partisanship, does what it does. So fully agree with what Lisa had to say. I'm a little hurt she didn't ask me about my COVID haircut routine, and it hasn't gotten as much attention as Ian's had on Twitter. That's okay. There's that prejudice coming up again. But just that ability and to confound what people think about politics, to take the little bit of a risk and say, here's what my party's thinking right now. Here's what we need out of this negotiation, and expose yourself a little bit because you have some kind of relationship with the other person is critical. And I think that's true in many aspects of life, but it's maybe more rare in politics, especially the politics we've been seeing.
So let's pick up on the COVID theme, and again, I'll put this to each of you, and you can jump in at any point during the other's answer as well. But maybe I'll start with Nathan on this. So you mentioned British Columbia during COVID, and it is interesting. I saw a tweet the other day from either the Premier or the Minister of Health praising actually the opposition health critic in British Columbia for holding a public forum and inviting the government there as well. And I thought, in a province, as you point out, Nathan, that provincially has kind of fierce partisan lines. They talk about a right of center free enterprise party and a socialist party, right? And this ideological divide. We haven't seen that during COVID. So a lot of good has come of that, and we've seen everyone defer to Dr. Bonnie Henry. But is there a problem when you don't have enough partisanship, when you have too much cooperation, and maybe you don't have enough of a critical role played by the people who are supposed to be the opposition critics?
And that might be a challenge that we're seeing happen in our federal legislature right now, with the decisions that have been taken by Parliament over massive amounts of spending. Is it appropriate to get along and then lower the level of scrutiny and hard questions that we have? I suppose especially in times like this, I'm thinking post 9/11, I'm thinking 2008 stock market crash. Lisa, and we all shared, unfortunately, in the events in October of that year when the gunmen stormed Parliament Hill. There's these crisis moments, and your response to that speaks a lot to the leader's character of each of the parties, and how is it that you engage in holding government account in the midst of those higher pressure moments. I think when you talked about Lisa's role in the Jody Wilson-Raybould SNC-Lavalin affair, it was intelligent, it was thoughtful cross-examination. It had I would argue, all of our questioning had some partisan angle to it, but it was on the side of the public and trying to get some answers. That's an effective role of partisanship, knowing that you have a place that you need to speak from. But what is the ultimate interest? Is the public understanding what's going on and that you're trying to better the situation, not just score another political point.
Lisa, do you want to jump in?
He's right. Thank you, Nathan, for explaining for me exactly what my concerns are right now. I think there is a role for opposition right across the country in order to keep, we always say keep the government to account. It's more than that. It really is about getting a deep dive on exactly what is happening. How many people across this country are looking at the front page of a newspaper, the first page of a website that they visit, and just getting the highlights or the headlines of what they think is happening in Ottawa? And the job of the opposition is to do the digging, is to read the transcripts, is to cross-examine the witnesses and get that further information that's needed. Now, what do you do with that information? If you take that information and you start writing attack ads, that's not going to be seen in a positive light. But if you take the information and you utilize it for the good of getting better policy, then you're doing your job. And that's the balance that any political partisan has to actually try to walk the line on. I was criticized during the Jody Wilson-Raybould, for lack of a better word, it wasn't an inquiry, but for her testimony at the comments. I asked her at one point, how did something make her feel? And I got a lot of flack from conservative partisans asking me, well, why did you ask the question about how she felt about anything? And my response was, I thought that's exactly what Canadians across the country wanted to know. How did that make you feel? And that was a valid piece of information people wanted to hear that I think actually underpinned her legitimacy as a human going through the process that she went through and endured successfully, by the way. So that's it in a nutshell. It's knowing the balance and knowing and understanding that the information to be utilized has to be really held sacred in order to further the safety and the health of people and help for the economy going into the future, and not to be utilized for cheap shots or even, and it's hard to keep that perception from happening, and we have to do the best we can, or they have to do the best they can to try to hit the right balance and the right tone.
But Lisa, let me ask you this. So you have one opposition party, the Conservatives, who are, moderate and right of center, like in a continuum there, I guess. You have another opposition party, the NDP, obviously left of center, and you're each looking at the government, the Liberals, who are a little bit of everything. And so how do you manage the cross-party collaboration in that situation? How does that work? Do you actually have communication with the Nathan Cullens of the world? How does it play out?
Yeah, you can always find kindred spirits in opposition parties in terms of on a case by case or on a file by file analysis. And that's where the critics can work with one another. I know for a fact, and I remember from the last parliament, that the Conservative critic for small business oftentimes spoke with the NDP critic for small business, because there's a lot of commonality in terms of what we were seeking for them. Sometimes the ideologies of the parties don't allow you to see eye to eye on the issue, but if the issue is about getting information, you can support one another. We do not coordinate question period between the two parties, and in fact, oftentimes it's curious for us to see whether or not the leader of the NDP is going to follow the line of questioning that was commenced by the Conservatives in the first round of the opposition. And sometimes it did, and sometimes it didn't, depending upon what the flavor of the day was. But really understanding where we have that same plane of ground in which we can actually agree on is important. And then on the other sides of it, just not trying to antagonize the ideologies of it when you're trying to get to the bottom of an issue.
Nathan, we look, and I think it's not unfair to say, with a lot of collective dismay at how fiercely partisan and divided and distorted things are south of the border, right? And worry kind of for the future of politics there. How difficult was it for you over the years to deal with kind of fierce partisans in other parties? To what extent was that because every party, including yours, has a range of people, some who are fiercely partisan, some who are narrowly ideological, some who are more moderate, but over the years, was that difficult to deal with, to try to maintain cross-party collaboration when some of the people in the other party would be so kind of fiercely ideological?
I think it's a great question, and it depends a lot on who the leaders are at the time. I think leadership has a huge effect on the MPs, the staff, and the tone of a lot of conversations. Because as we've been talking, I think, how do Canadians reward cross-partisanship, or do we? We say we like it. In poll after poll, I see Canadians like when parties collaborate and they work together on solutions. But we also like a good fight once in a while. We like to, and we like the simple math of red team, blue team, orange team, green team. It's easy to translate into our day-to-day lives. Quick headline, as Lisa said. And I think sometimes we don't always reward collegiality. We don't always reward those actors who are quietly or determinedly going about their business. I think the leaders matter a lot. One former Liberal cabinet minister, when I first came into the House way back in 2004, he said, the only question you have for yourself coming in is to always know who you work for. Who do you work for? And I said, well, I don't know. I work for my constituents. He said, oh, do you? But do you also work for the party leader? Do you work for the party? And you can see it over time, whether someone's status went up or down within Parliament. Sometimes was connected to how well the leadership saw them. And I don't mean just the prime minister or the leader of the party, but the staff that were around them, and who are 9 times out of 10 far more partisan, I found, than the elected people. So I'm thinking about some of the people on this call who are interested in being political staff or interested in working in senior civil service positions or are doing so already, to be aware of who you work for all the time, because it's an important motivating factor in how you conduct yourself, because you can be punished. And Lisa said it's nice to find a nice voice in the other opposition parties. It's great to find that similar friend or friendly face within the government as well. A minister who says, could you get up in question period tomorrow and just drill me? I need my bureaucracy is not moving. I need the prime minister to understand how much pressure I'm under. Here's a subject that would really embarrass us. Could you do it? And it's like, oh, this is an interesting moment in, I guess, cross-partisanship, all trying to move an issue along that isn't getting sufficient. Wouldn't we have loved questions on long-term care homes a year ago at all the provincial legislatures, drilling the government on what they were or were not doing? I think we would have all benefited from it, and certainly the lives lost would have been diminished if we'd had more attention to this issue and there'd been more quote-unquote partisanship going after an important issue.
So wait a sec, Nathan. I feel like maybe I missed an important point here. Are you saying that does happen in terms of the opposition kind of helping out the government by asking a tough question once in a while, or it should happen?
It does.
Wow.
It depends. I wouldn't say it's many ministers. You have to have somebody who has a lot of confidence and knows how to handle a tough question. But that ability to say, I care more about this issue than being embarrassed for 30 seconds. I cannot get my department to move on issue X, and the prime minister doesn't seem to care enough, or the leadership around the prime minister care enough. And I would, not to break any confidences, but I'd say some of the things that came up at the SNC-Lavalin affair weren't always sourced within the opposition. I think there were things, and not out of Jody Wilson-Raybould. I mean, some people around the prime minister's office who wanted issues exposed would make information known to the opposition because they couldn't ask the questions, but we could.
So, Lisa, you've been a cabinet minister with multiple portfolios. Were you ever in that situation where you were asking to be set up, maybe is the wrong word because it implies the wrong thing, but ask the opposition to ask you a tough question?
Yes, but not directly. I would oftentimes, if a stakeholder came in who was the subject of the difficult file, advice would be given to the stakeholder to go and brief the opposition, because this is a question that really should be asked of the minister during the question period. So if you didn't feel that you had the relationship and the trust with the person who was your critic on the other side, you could always do it through the stakeholder themselves, because they flow freely amongst all the parties, or at least they should. And that was an effective way of getting it out. And by the way, Nathan, good for you for getting somebody from the PMO to give you information. I got nothing. Although Jerry Butts let everybody think that he and I are best buddies from Cape Breton. Well, we're friends, but you know.
And so,
Cape Breton connection.
When that process happened, Lisa, like generally speaking, you talked with stakeholder goes to the opposition critic, he or she then asks a tough question to you as a cabinet minister. I know we touched on it, but let me ask you directly, what do you get out of that? Why do you want that process to happen?
What it shows is that it's one of the questions that's being asked of the minister. Therefore, it's an issue. Therefore, it needs to be managed. Therefore, we need to have a plan. So it would give me at least the ability to say, this is something we need to look at. We're going to chat about this amongst ourselves at cabinet. I'd have the ability to bring it up saying, look, I got this question. This is a serious matter. And obviously, it's escalated from the stakeholder complaining up to the members of the opposition.
So one of the great things of having the two of you here as panelists is that you just are so rich with real world experience, right? And you can tell from some of my questions that despite the number of years I've been a reporter, I'm learning stuff here, and I'm sure many of the people who are taking part in this are learning. Let me ask a question, and I'll ask it maybe using a provocative word, but let me just, in case somebody watching is saying, wait a second, this sounds like, behind the scenes collusion basically between opposition and government, and you're kind of, that's not proper. Nathan, if someone were to use the word collusion here, what would you say to that?
Well, to what end? Like, what's the point of the collaboration? If I'm trying to, I can remember an environment minister was just having such a difficult time getting some climate targets put through cabinet, just couldn't get it through. And so you use the word collude, I suppose, but we collaborated to say, what kind of pressure points do you need? Is it the business council? Is it is it question period? What can we see? Because in this moment, we have common interest. I don't know. I suppose it could speak of cigar-filled backrooms, but it's to what end? If it's to screw the public out of information or to mishandle money, then yeah, of course, that's some kind of a colluded process. If it's simply to draw attention to an issue that Canadians, if given the moment, would say, yeah, this needs better work than what we've seen so far, great. Because the theater of question period, or the ability at a high-profile Commons meeting where the media are paying attention, the public's there, can put some light on something that matters. And we are legislators. And I remind my colleagues in the government benches that only the cabinet is part of the government. Everybody else that is sitting in the Liberal benches right now, and previously under Harper in the so-called backbenches, their responsibility is also to hold government to account. But we in Canada, they do this in the UK, of course, and other places. In Canada, we've lost all of this tradition, and it disturbs me a bit because it's just too much parroting. There's too much noise, too much wasted time of scripted lines that have been prepared by a staff person that get us nowhere in the conversation. And so I love those moments when someone leans across and says, you want to work, you want to get something done. It's about issue X. Let's see what kind of attention we can bring to it. That's a good day at the office.
Yeah. And it's not often, Ian. Like, this isn't something that happens. It's very specific to very specific personalities and an issue that is unique. So has it happened? And you asked me if has it happened? Yeah, it's happened in my career on a marine issue that you probably never even heard of, but I still was able to get the issue onto the table.
And speaking of things that many of us don't see and don't make headlines, the whole committee process is a world that I feel like involves a huge amount of work by MPs and their staffs that we don't get to see. And I assume that cross-party collaboration, Lisa, but you tell me, is critical at the committee level.
Yeah, I mean, it's different. Certainly, you can sometimes see where you want to really put the government in an awkward position and not embarrass them, but definitely catch them on their back foot in terms of bringing out information. So my first, the first committee I ever went to was when I was the new finance critic, and Guy Caron was the NDP critic as well. And he and I would work together at committee. We never met separately from committee, but if we were sitting next to each other at committee, we would have a discussion about where do you think we should go in this issue? And one of the things that Guy and I actually agreed on was that we definitely needed to have more study on universal basic income. And I know you're shocked, a conservative saying that she wanted more study on universal basic income, but Hugh Siegel, and there's a lot of chat about it about 4 years ago, a lot more chat today. We wanted to have a study. He wanted it for one purpose, I wanted it for another purpose, but we both agreed we wanted the study. So we brought the motion forward. He supported it. And what you would see a committee a lot of times too, is a very quick conference between the Conservative, NDP, Green, Bloc, whoever was sitting there to say, how are you going to vote on this issue? And sometimes we all agreed and sometimes we didn't. Nathan and I did not agree all the time on how to vote on during the Jody Wilson-Raybould committee hearings. And in fact, he lambasted me one time for a complete misstep I made in terms of saying something that I didn't mean literally, but figuratively, and not understanding the bigger context of it. I totally messed up. And he called me on it and he spanked me hard on TV, but that's okay. We're still buddies.
No record.
It never happened. I'm going to send you the clip.
Well, you know what? Yeah, so I feel like I should know exactly what you're talking about, and I don't. So, and other people may feel the same way. So, what did you do? How did you misspeak?
I'm very afraid of starting a Twitter storm all over again. But when we were talking, we were trying to get to the bottom of exactly how much the Prime Minister's office knew or didn't know. And there was a reporter who wrote a book about Prime Minister Trudeau who had insight and had access to all of the relevant players during the period of time. And his book came out in the middle of it. So I suggested perhaps we should have the author come in and chat with us about, you know, the content of his book. Nope, that did not go over well. I was now hauling in members of the press to interrogate them, and I was accused of all kinds of fun. And anyhow, Nathan, you can move on. You can just give your speech again. It was awesome during the time. And I literally wanted to cry because I didn't get the significance of what I had actually said. And the overlaid on what I had said was somebody else's interpretation of what I said. And it was a great political point, and I'm sure it made a lot of great fundraising letters, but I learned my lesson.
So Nathan, you know what strikes me about that whole story is that, so you have somebody like Lisa Raitt, who you know is a decent person, and you know she conducted herself so well in that hearing, and she makes, by her own admission, a mistake, I guess. You know, she didn't fully, you know. So then you're sitting there on the other side. You're a smart, you know, parliamentarian, and you realize, A, it's a mistake, and B, you can maybe benefit from pointing it out, and maybe you should benefit from pointing it out. So how do you conduct yourself, especially given the fact that we've heard, you know, you reached out to Lisa when she walked into the House of Commons so many years before. So how do you, you know, especially given this theme of cross-party collaboration, how do you conduct yourself there? How should you have conducted yourself there?
He was right in what he did. He was right in what he did, by the way. No, you were.
Yeah,
it's a teachable moment. It's a
Well,
teachable moment.
I would never go that far. I suppose there's also moments where our own supporters get worried, right? Because they like the partisanship too.
Yeah.
And this is not, I'm not suggesting this was my motivation, but you have to keep everybody on point regardless. And because I have a relationship with Lisa, that I have no fear of really hurting that relationship, because it was not Lisa's describing it much harder than I was, but it's not so over the top as to make it personal and all the rest and an invective. If you're seen as too collaborative, regardless of the party and which way it goes, people start to discredit you. It's a strange thing where they say, I saw you smile and shake Prime Minister Trudeau's hand. Why were you doing that? I hate that guy. I want you to oppose him. It's like, we're people, we're humans. I was asking about his kids. Like, so to your question about committee process, I think it depends on the topic. Some committees are notoriously at each other's throats and have been for years. The status of women, I don't know about this parliament, but previous parliaments went for years, the most bitter and difficult ones. Fisheries gets along. I don't know why. Fisheries has always gotten along. There are moments, and I think minority parliaments, I'm an advocate for moments where power is not concentrated in the Prime Minister's office, which it is more so under majority parliaments. And we're seeing that effect, for good or ill, depending on how you view things right now. That's also true at the committee level, where when a motion comes forward, it's not a done deal before you've even debated it, because the government has lined up sufficient votes to pass the motion and the study and all the rest of it. And every majority parliament I've seen does it, where the Prime Minister's hand will reach, their office will reach in once in a while to a committee and saying, you're not studying that anymore, you're done. And I've seen minority parliaments where very effective things are done across party lines, because power is not concentrated. You got to make deals, you got to talk to each other. And I think no one's got all the answers to the challenges we face at any given moment. Certainly right now, there's not one party that has the treasure trove of what this country needs to do now and in the next 10 years. Everyone's got a bit of the solution. Some are more right than others, given the topic. But I like the minority statuses because it's a lot more of a dynamic flow between the parliamentarians. They're all empowered a little bit more. And the folks around the Prime Minister are empowered just a little bit less, which 9 times out of 10 is not a bad thing.
It's a good thing.
Lisa, when Nathan was talking about, he's shaking the Prime Minister's hand, and someone in his party is saying, "Why are you doing that? You know, here's our political enemy. You shouldn't be, smiling, be friendly with him." You were nodding your head. You've had similar kind of feedback, I guess.
I've spent most of my conservative life being accused of being a liberal. Never an NDP though, Nathan. I'm sorry about that.
It's okay.
But it's okay. You get along with people, or you try to get along with people. You're going to get questions on your bona fides.
You know, I found it interesting, Lisa, at the beginning when you talked about Nathan reaching out to you when you entered the House of Commons, because I was thinking it's probably true the entire time you were in politics, but certainly towards the end of the time that the Conservatives were in government, there were some real fierce partisans who seemed to kind of get a lot of media coverage anyway. But I think they took some leadership in the way the party dealt with that campaign, that election campaign. When I see some of the more fiercely partisan people for any of the parties, but let me ask about the Conservatives, are they also able to collaborate across parties, kind of behind the scenes, or less so?
Yeah, you can be a fierce partisan and still collaborate to an extent, but it's going to be a much shorter list, I would say, of issues, and a much narrower field of vision that you can have those conversations with. So that's it is going to be completely dependent upon what is who the personalities are. Partisanship can be facilitated. I'll give you an example. One of the biggest partisans you'll ever meet in your life is John Baird. But John Baird as well is very good at speaking with the opposition and trying to, he's fantastic at it. He's always friendly. Everybody loves John, as do I. But he also shows his partisanship, and he has figured out the balance. I mean, he is a really good retail politician when it comes to that.
But, you know, I can see that because he does seem like a nice person in person. So we're all being careful here, right? But I can think of some people who there's an edge to them when I see them publicly, but there's an edge to them when I see them, not that I socialize with them, but when they're in the newsroom here, or, you know, I'm covering something, I see that edge there too. And then listening to this whole conversation, I think, how is that person really able to soften enough that they can actually call up Nathan Cullen and say, hey, let's have a beer and talk about this. So Nathan, let me put that to you. Like, were there people over the years from every party, including yours, who were just so partisan that they never were able to properly reach across to the other side?
Oh yeah, and sometimes proudly so. Some of those folks would highlight how much they were despised by the other side. You know, they kind of held that as they're almost like, those are the Kool-Aid drinkers, the folks that have just been in this from the beginning and can only think along these ideological partisan terms. There's others that were more like WWE wrestlers. You know, they put on a costume. I'm not saying this is John Baird, although a little. They put on a persona, and they're fierce pit bulls, and, you know, they get the cheers, they get their caucus standing up. They're really good at rallying the team. And I know people don't sometimes like that in watching the House of Commons. I would also say, you know, play ultimate frisbee or do any team event. There's going to be a little bit of rallying from time to time, which also feels pretty good. No, if there's a bitterness to what you're doing, and, you know, like, if there's some angle that has got the ad hominem, it's got the very personal feeling to your approach to politics, it's really hard to, right after the fact, you know, say, hey, can we work on an issue together? For me, it is. If somebody comes after me, I had somebody go after my kids a couple of times, and it was like, look, man, you're dead to me. I'm not answering your calls. You're taking this to another level. So good luck. That's your politic. If your constituents reward you for that, fantastic. But I watched too many of those folks that we don't remember anymore, who were remembered in the moment for just being so fierce. And yeah, sure. And they go back into the lobby where the staff are, and everybody claps and cheers and say, wow, you really punched that guy hard. It's that macho part of politics that I hope is dying. But like you said earlier, south of the border, it seems to have been rewarded, at least to this point, some sort of very sort of barbaric practices type, not to use a too familiar term, but a very barbaric way of doing politics.
That either was just a metaphor that came to your mind, or you're still devilishly clever in how you use metaphors.
Just a common expression that's used in everyday conversation.
Yeah, I'm teasing you. Lisa did mention to us occasionally
she's back.
She's back. Okay,
I'm back. Sorry.
Okay. No.
Technology. I live in the country. Sorry about that.
No problem at all. We're going to be taking questions from the people who are watching in just a couple of minutes. So I thought maybe I'd ask each of you this, and Lisa, let me start with you. I'm sure. Oh, I know you're very busy, kind of post in your post MP life, but if you've had a chance to sit back and reflect, particularly on this issue of cross-party collaboration, any suggestions on how we should be reforming the system to achieve this better?
Yeah, I don't know if the system has any impact on it, other than having conversations like we're having right now, showing that there is a human side. My big concern is that I saw a whole host of new MPs elected in 2015 who thought their role was to be mean to the opposition. And that has to start from the government side, the willingness to be open and willing to be, approachable, wanting to have conversations with the other side. I wrote a minister after the election saying, I'm happy to help in whatever way I can, blah, blah, blah. And I got a curt note back saying, we got it handled. Don't worry about it. I thought, show a little class, man or woman. I'm not telling you who it was. So I thought, okay, well, I guess I tried. It was not accepted. That's fine. And that just sets the parameters of what the relationship's going to be like. But did it deter me from reaching out to another minister? Nope. I reached out to another minister, and we'll have a relationship. And the other thing I'll tell you too, Ian, is important, is that for everybody out there thinking of getting involved in politics or as an elected official, there is a life you have to go back to eventually. And you have to remind yourself while you're sitting in that role as a member of parliament, that what you do while you're a member will follow you for the rest of your time, the rest of your life. And as a result, how you're viewed is incredibly important, and who your friends are is important. And I'll give you an example again. One of the people that I call a lot, I would say every 2 weeks, he's going to kill me for outing him, is Tom Mulcair. I talk to Tom Mulcair every 2 weeks without a question. We talk about what's happening in Montreal, what's happening in Toronto. And it's a good relationship to have. That started because his wife and I ended up having a really lovely conversation in Air Canada Lounge. And as a result, he and I have been good friends, not while he was leader of the opposition, certainly after, but I value that relationship I have with him, because I think he was the best leader of any opposition that we've ever had in the history of Canada. And I say that because I wear most of the scars.
Well, and like you, he is a fantastic cross-examiner, right? That was one of his
He's
great
much
strengths.
better, but thank you very much. Yeah,
Well,
he's fantastic. I emulated him. I tried to emulate him as much as I could.
Are you serious?
Yeah, for sure. I talk to Tom all the time about that. Yeah.
Because honestly,
great advice.
Both of you are fantastic at it, and it's a art that I really admire. Nathan, in terms of lessons, like whether it's a systemic change that needs to be made, or personal change, or party changes, in order to try to better achieve this cross-party collaboration.
Well, first of all, Lisa talks to Tom more than I talked to Tom, and I was his house leader. I don't know how she's managed to pull that off.
It's his wife, Catherine. That's why.
Catherine is the great unifier. I actually do believe in some systemic. It goes back to my comment about what do we reward? Do we reward partisanship? Do we reward the attack dogs? And they have their role, or do we reward those from party leaders on down who are willing to say, my opponent here has a really good point. I remember the current prime minister saying, they're not our enemy, they're our opponents. I thought, great, but that was at the beginning of his term. I think some of that tone shifted over time. I do think our voting system, we spent a lot of time on electoral reform in one of those parliaments in 2015, if you'll remember, spent a couple of years, and that committee worked excellent together, actually. Came up with a good idea, and that was not taken up by the government. The reason I was enthusiastic about those things is not the nerd factor of voting systems. I was trying to find a way that would reward parties and politicians who got along, who found compromise points, because I worry about the hyperpartisan nature going on globally, not just within the States, but right across Europe, and what it can manifest, that politic of discontent and grievance when people feel ignored from their politics, from what is happening, produces the Trumps, it produces the Brazilian president, it produces things that matter to all of us, regardless of whether you care about politics or not. So I'm enthusiastic about opening up the parties, for example. They are not transparent, as you know, Ian and Lisa, in the way that they elect their leaders and the way that they fundraise and spend money and how they handle our data as Canadians. And this drives me crazy as a partisan because it's not right. And it leads to bad outcomes and dangerous outcomes. So I think there are some systemic things that we could look at. I think that would help reward those that can collaborate, because I want those people leading our country. People who are good at finding common ground with people they disagree with. And living in Northwestern BC, I got a lot of gun owners as far as I'm concerned.
Is Nathan still there? Because we're just, at least.
I think he's.
Yeah.
I think he's. Oh, there he is. He's.
Oh
no, he's back.
Frozen.
He's back.
I was making some really good points there too. Yeah.
Well, we heard almost all of it just before you mentioned that being in Northwestern BC is where I started to lose you. So it was only about 10 or 15 seconds. If you want to pick up, like, kind of go back to that point.
I feel blessed having represented this riding, because it has a lot of conservatives, it has a lot of libertarians, it has a lot of deeply faith-based people, a lot of 35% Indigenous. Getting elected here without collaborative effort is almost impossible. And I just feel really grateful that it was informing some of my politics as I went through. Understanding why gun owners were concerned about a particular piece of legislation was easy for me, much more difficult for a colleague living in downtown Toronto.
Yeah.
Well, very thoughtful, interesting, engaging answers, as we all expected. And so now I'm going to throw it over to those of you in Toronto who are going to sort of introduce the questions from the people who have been watching.
Okay, thank you so much. So first off, we have a question from Catherine. If Catherine can unmute herself and ask the question.
Sure. Hi. Thanks, everyone, for organizing this. It's been really great. I'm kind of curious. I've read a lot of reports over the last couple of years that Canada has become starting to polarize a little bit more, not obviously to the same degree as in the United States. But I'm just curious about your thoughts on how nonpartisanship plays in the polarization of the population and the growing economic inequity that we've been seeing building over the last several years. In particular, because I'm just curious, like, if you had, say, if you don't have, say, a very partisan person representing you in Parliament, and that view isn't expressed, I'm just curious if that leads to splintering of parties, or just generally your thoughts on that and how we might move forward.
You want to go first, Nathan, or shall I?
You go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for the question, Catherine. While you were speaking, you made me realize that there's a difference between being a partisan and a difference between being a polarizing figure. And partisanship does not necessarily mean polarization. Partisanship means that you have found other people who you agree with in basic fundamental values, and together you have a stronger voice than you would as individuals. That's partisanship. That's good. Polarization is not good. That's demonizing your enemy. That is belittling your opponent. That's the kind of, I think, that's the kind of poison that seeps into the system. And that's something that we should all condemn, quite frankly. I don't appreciate, like Nathan had already said, the Prime Minister at one point in time did say, they're not our opponents, I forget how he phrased it, sorry about that. But they're not our enemy, they're our opponents. And I get that. So trying not to polarize and to be personal, I think is the best thing that politicians should keep in the back of their head, difference between that and that. David Jacobson was the United States the ambassador from the US to Canada first time for President Obama. And he said to me that what he loved about Canada was that here, the political spectrum, if the political spectrum in the United States is A to Z, Canada is L to P. You don't see the far extremes on either side. And I think as long as we can hold ourselves in that lane and not have it bleed out like that, it's going to be better. But the reason why we start getting the wavering on both sides is when people feel that they're not being heard. So elected representatives have to do a better job. easy for me to say because I'm no longer one, but I do feel that that is important. Over to you, Nathan.
Well, it wouldn't be a Zoom call unless somebody made a recommendation for a podcast. And Michael Lewis has a podcast out that is fantastic. And his first season is talking about what happens when we lose faith in the referees. What happens as a society when we lose faith? And you see the current president's attacks on judges or on the folks who are regulating various aspects of our life, of their lives. I think I was curious. We're not going to see the confrontation between Trump and Bernie Sanders, but the curiosity I had was maybe a bit of a sick curiosity. Was those are two politicians who are born of the politics of grievance, right? If your life is not great and you're a Bernie Sanders supporter, it's the banks, it's Wall Street, it's the corporate elite. If it's Donald Trump, it's Washington and the swamp. But they both come from the same energy, as far as I can tell, which is you don't have to look at what's going on in your life and what's happened and the economic injustices that sort of built the society around you. You get to blame somebody. And that politics of grievance is fed and nurtured by that polarization you talk about, because I can use it. I can use those beautiful wedge issues and just tap, 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 tap away to split you off and bring you to my side of the argument without having to deal with the complexity of how to fix economic inequality, social injustice, the environmental catastrophe, all those things. I just say it's somebody else's fault. And that's when that's breeding ground for the polarization, not the partisanship, the polarization you talked about.
All right, time for our next question.
Okay, thank you. I also just wanted to introduce myself quickly so you know who's asking your questions and you're sending those to. So I've been involved with the IFL for 4 years now, started off as a facilitator at UBC, and I'm now a program coordinator for the Institute at Ryerson. So super excited. And thank you for the questions. Please keep them coming. So next we have a question from Emmett. Emmett, if you can please unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hi, everyone. Great event so far. Thanks so much, Lisa and Nathan, for coming here and imparting your wisdom on all of us. My question is kind of topical, deals with a big current event. So the Conservative Party is going through a very volatile, unprecedented sort of leadership race. Kind of going off of what's been discussed earlier, I was wondering if either of you believe there are any outcomes or even leadership candidates that will kind of damage the ability for federal parliamentarians to work in a collaborative manner?
So I have to declare at this point, Emmett, that I am the co-chair of the Leadership Election Organizing Committee, and as such, I am bound to be non-biased, and as well, I can't take sides or even comment on any of the candidates because I have to make sure that I can keep the process going straight. So I'll let Nathan opine upon the 4 candidates. Without even, I may actually take my video off. I can't even change my face as you're talking about individuals because I can't be seen to be favoring one or the other. So Nathan, over to you. Stone face, here I go.
Well, full disclosure, I'm the other co-chair of the Conservative Leadership
No, you're
Race.
not.
This
No,
is
you're
breaking
lying.
news. This
You're
is
lying.
important
You're lying.
for everyone to understand. I am not. Emmett, great question, and I'm inclined towards you because your name was the second choice for one of my twins. We were so close to Emmett, ended up on Elliot. It was a close call. I don't know. I think McKay's had this to lose from the beginning. From my perspective, he's certainly got brand and name recognition and history and lineage and that, defining leadership jawline. That's always important. Lisa, keep your stone face there. He's not had a stellar campaign. He's a lot of self-inflicted type of wounds. But in terms of your question about will any of their leadership end up damaging or hurting the ability for cross-partisanship, I don't know. Peter and I had our tussles over the years. I like him. We get along. I would never play rugby with him, just as a general rule, because he changes into another kind of human once a rugby pitch is involved. But I think he's it'll be interesting. I think betting money is still on him, and I don't foresee anything natural, although he will be super aggressive. Like he's going to be very forceful in what he says, and I think he probably understands the prime minister in terms of coming from a political family and that sort of more elite political class. So they'll be speaking the same language, and maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not. I don't know if they're drawing from the same well in terms of people's sympathies, but we'll see. And when's the date, Lisa? When's the big day?
Oh, I can say that. Okay. We're all ballots have to be in by August 24th, and providing we can count them, we're going to get it out as soon as we can. It all depends upon what kind of social distancing rules we have at the time. It's all paper ballots, so it's over 200,000 ballots that we got to count by hand.
Wow. Okay.
So maybe December.
All right, our
Thanks,
next
Annette.
question.
Okay, next we have Alice. Alice, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for your really great presentation. I learned a lot. I have a question for you. I think when I was looking at the chat, at the bio of everyone, a lot of people seem to be involved with in the government in some capacity. So maybe this, I'm hoping, would be useful for other people as well. I am a current federal civil servant, and I just started my career. I graduated maybe like 4 months before this pandemic, and and I'm contemplating between going down the path of continuing being a civil servant and perhaps moving more senior into that role and effecting changes in that capacity versus going down the elected political office route. And I'm hoping to hear your thoughts on if you could compare and contrast a little bit these two different capacities and what one can achieve in those two roles, and perhaps for whom those two roles might be more appropriate. Thank you.
Great question.
You guys are like exceedingly polite,
Okay.
so I will. Yes, Lisa, you start. Yes.
So my first career was as close to a federal civil servant as you could get. I ran the Toronto Port Authority, and I ended up running for office because I was so frustrated with political decision making, both at the municipal level and the federal level. I got to the point where I said, look, I can complain about it, or I can put my name on the ballot. And I ended up putting my name on the ballot, and it worked out for me. But you're right. What is the difference? What kind of change can you make? I would say that there is great value in understanding how the bureaucracy and the government works in Ottawa. Not a lot of people speak the language, and it's a lot of language. And being able to interpret that for what it means. If you are sitting in a civil servant position, a federal civil servant position, and you understand the greater importance and you don't sit within that bubble, you have a great opportunity to affect change. And the reason being is when you get to a certain level, you're going to interact with ministerial staff. And those ministerial staffers are the ones that will steal your idea and take it to their minister in order to show how smart they are. And as a result, your ideas can really make it through the system. Now, you don't want to tick off who reports to you, but you develop relationships, and sometimes those kinds of things that are important to you can make it to a level without you having to actually be elected. I would say that a federal civil servant certainly has the greater ability to know that they have a job. The uncertainty of your ability to be employed as a politician oftentimes may make you focus on things other than affecting good change for Canadians. Sometimes it's really just about making sure you keep your job, either from nominations or in an election process. So I think at the end of the day, it's a calling, Alice. It's a calling, and whatever really just gets your juices flowing is what you're going to want to do. But there's as much a chance. One is not better than the other. There's as much a chance to make a difference for the country serving in the civil service ranks as there is as an elected official, and perhaps maybe even more. So equal, depends upon you. Which way do you want to go? And if you want to have security and a pension.
I love that Lisa used the word calling. Sometimes I think I annoyed people, but they would ask me when I was elected, they say, how's work going? How's the job? And I'd say, it's not a job. It's a vocation. Because it's everything. You don't turn it off when you're going to go, people who've been around politicians would know this, that good ones are constantly being talked to and asked about. I can remember, I think it was my first year, I was at my local pool here in Northern BC having a swim, and in between lengths, just adjusting my goggles, and a guy stands up in the next lane and he says, you are you Cullen? And I said, yeah. And he says, I got a question about immigration. And I just, as a test, I thought, I wonder how long we're going to be here. Cause I'm in a Speedo, not to give you terrible images, but 35 minutes later, I said, I think I'm going to get back to the pool because I want to keep swimming. If it's not a calling, if you're not brought into that, then don't do it. Like it's terrible job security. You're not going to love it. You got to love people. You got to be curious about them. Lisa's right. Sometimes your ability to affect change and go strive for some really important issue, it can be completely disconnected to your political fortunes. And do you do it? Or it could be so connected it'll hurt your political fortunes. That the first thing that most party leaders say to an MP coming in, your first job is to get elected again.
Yeah.
That's your first job. If you're not paying attention to that, you can have all the best ideas in the world. You're just not going to be back here. You're going to be a one-term wonder and gone. Yeah. It takes usually more than a term to affect change. So it gets this weird dynamic between self-serving, trying to maintain yourself in office, be strong enough so that you can take those chances and maybe disagree with your voters. Let's remember, we would still have the death penalty in this country if the MPs in that parliament had just listened to their voters, because the death penalty was overwhelmingly popular at the time, 78% support, but the evidence was contrary to it. It didn't work. It wasn't an effective criminal justice tool. That parliament had enough courage to go away in a direction that I think was beneficial to us all. So to you, I'd say, what are your qualities? What do you love in life? Do you feel the calling for it? Then consider it. If it's something else, don't do it. And maybe get yourself into a political staff role, because that's sort of a hybrid between where you're doing some of that other work without having to be the same exposure level as those who are in elected office.
Yeah. And you can be placed in the minister's office when you're a civil servant too.
That's right. It's a great way to go.
Okay, I'll look into that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good luck.
Our next question.
Okay, we have Mark asking the next question. Mark, you should be unmuted.
Yeah, unmuted now. Thanks very much. So I'm dialing in from Victoria, British Columbia. And for those of you who know the political map out here, as a conservative, I'm probably one of only 5 that exist in this part of the world. But we're fighting the good fight out here. One of the interesting dynamics that we do experience here, though, is that federally, of course, you've got Conservatives, Liberals, and NDP, and a bit of a Green presence here. But provincially, the BC Liberal Party is a coalition of Conservatives and Liberals. And so this conversation has been particularly interesting for me with respect to the importance of that crossing the aisle kind of a conversation. I have found it interesting here that, when we're in a federal election campaign, we're doing our own thing, but provincially, some of my very best friends are those that are the federal Liberals that we're working against in federal campaigns. And we have to maintain that relationship at the volunteer and organizational level if we're going to be effective at provincial and civic levels. So with that backdrop and the importance of that ability to talk and work across the aisle, can you comment on the role of social media? We all know the effect that it has had thus far on tribalism, but can you talk about how it might be used going forward in a more productive way to help us work better across the aisle? I'll mute it now. Thanks.
It's your turn to go first, Nathan.
Wow, that's first of all, Mark, continue fighting the good fight. I know the Victoria Conservative Club is small but mighty and determined. The social, my experience, because there's a group of us that I started in 2004 and left in 15 years later, that when I got elected, there wasn't Facebook, there wasn't Twitter, your website was important. Imagine that. And your ability to communicate in other channels, telephone town halls and all sorts of different ways to talk to constituents. I love the advent of social media as a politician to call people to events, bring attention to items. It is a terrible place for conversation, to the point where it became, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but mostly one directional for me. I would post a news story, I would post a comment and leave. I couldn't, because I get affected by these attacks and the bitterness. And I don't know how it is for you, Lisa, or you, Ian, in the media, But I can remember standing around a group of reporters early on saying, do you guys read the comments after a story you've posted online? And they all laughed, but they said, are you crazy? Like, it would be so demoralized. It was hard. Could social media offer that opportunity? It could. It could be this place where people talk about things and exchange and organize, and they do some of that. I guess during the COVID experience, it's been certainly helpful in terms of communicating and getting messages out and debunking, chloroquine and whatnot. But generally speaking, I haven't seen it as a net positive. It is what it is, I guess, is how I look at it. But in terms of influencing politicians, for me, it became a very poor tool because I had to wade through all this noise and garbage and animosity and partisanship to find the little gem and nugget of real, honest, and good feedback about something I'd said being really stupid and misunderstanding an issue. So I became quite skeptical of the exercise. Great during COVID, it seems to be working to some effect. In general, in terms of increasing cross-partisanship, I don't know. I don't see a lot of that effect so far. Lisa, inspire me. Tell me how that I'm wrong and that social media is going to be good for this issue.
I'm like you. I use social media for two things: to transmit what I'm doing, and I use it to curate my own news feed. Quite frankly, I find usually the most up-to-date information you can get, if you can find it, is through Twitter. You're right on top of the issue, and sometimes knowing what's going on right away. Breaking news. Everything's breaking news though these days, so I don't fall for that hashtag anymore. But what I would say is what I really have learned to appreciate since COVID-19, and we've all been sent home, is, and I've come to this notion, I wish Twitter was like Zoom. Everybody's name is up, your face is all there, we can mute you, you're forced to listen, but then you're allowed to speak. And when you speak, you can't hide behind an avatar. You're there, you're not an egg anymore, you are yourself. So if social media was like Zoom, the world would be a better place. And maybe we'll all get out of yelling at each other in small rooms or go to house party and play real games. I don't know, but I think social media, Mark, at the end of the day is evolving. Whether or not someone's going to pick up on Zoom or house party or webinar, whatever kinds of ways in which people are going to communicate, perhaps that's going to overtake it. Perhaps we're not going to be silent and alone anymore. We're going to do things face to face and basically stand up for what you believe in and get rid of the bots, because you can't have bots. Although, and I apologize to the people whose pictures aren't up. I'm not singling you out. You're all good. Your names are there at the very least. So.
Thanks very much.
And thank you for being a conservative in BC. I feel your pain. I'm from Cape Breton.
Okay, next we have an IFL alum, Arian, who wants to ask a question.
Thank you so much for your talk, and thank you for organizing this great event, a great learning opportunity. You briefly talked about committees. I had a question about how do you think, what kind of committee changes and reforms can be done to promote these kinds of collaborative and cross-partisan initiatives? And are there ways to make committees effective in a way that, things like expert testimonies and traveling with the committees to different areas of the country can make decision-making for the country more beneficial overall? Are there any changes that you recommend? And thank you.
Yeah, I really elect your own chair, really elect your own chair, not say you're electing your own chair. Do not allow the parliamentary secretary to sit on the committee. I agree with that fundamentally, because that takes away the government. Nathan pointed out something incredibly important that people may not necessarily always dwell on. The government is a very small piece of the House of Commons. They're just the cabinet ministers and the PM. Everyone else is not in government. Everyone else is there to hold government to account, including the members of the party who happen to be holding the power in the Commons at the time. And as a result, giving more voice and more power to the MPs who sit on that committee. Michael Chong brought forward a bill to try to make things better. I think there's a lot of people who believe in democracy are going to continue to do that. And I think we really do have to step away from central planning, central control. It really isn't beneficial for the country. But I will not go as far as Nathan may want to go, and that is to talk about proportional representation. I'm not there, Nathan.
I'll get you there one day, Lisa.
Only because my name would never be at the top of the list for conservatives.
No, we wouldn't do lists. We wouldn't do lists.
Okay.
Very much what Lisa said, empowering the chairs. It would be the one thing, if I would borrow anything from US politics, it might be the one thing I would borrow is the strength of their committee system. That chairs of particular committees within Congress hold a significant influence over what happens in the larger political discourse. They're well-resourced, they're well-researched. They can be terrible events and useless as well, as any committee anywhere can. But if you're sitting as the chair or the vice chair of certain committees within Congress, the influence and the stature that they hold can be equivalent to a member of cabinet almost, because at that committee, these big decisions take place, whether it's procurement, whether it's budgetary issues, health, whatnot. Our committees could be so much more, and they're not. And I can remember moments when we're making progress, we're collaborating, we're cross-partisan, and the Prime Minister's office staffer sitting at the wall is on the phone texting away, and I can see when the alert goes off because they can see the decision coming that they suspect the PMO is not going to like, and they literally lean forward to the parliamentary secretary and say, nope, you can't do this. And then the vote flips. And it's a half dozen times I watched it happen, and it's so devastating as a parliamentarian when you've been able to bring everybody there. We're convinced, we're happy, we're going to get something done, but somebody unelected somewhere else has said, I've watched your committee, don't do it. It's going to potentially embarrass us. So watching that happen is devastating.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Erin.
Thanks, Erin.
Okay, we have Antonin next.
Hi, thanks a lot for the presentation, quite interesting. So my question is following up on the last one. We talked about partisanship and cross-party collaboration, but I would like to go maybe beyond the parliamentary system per se, and have your thoughts about the role of democratic innovations. Let's say like the example in BC on electoral reform and in Ontario also. So do you see a role for like citizen assemblies or other kind of democratic innovation at the federal level? Could they be useful to diffuse excessive partisanship in some debate?
Yeah, I think if I could jump quickly. So
Please,
that was a regret that I had federally. We had proposed a citizens assembly to have a group of nominated citizens of all backgrounds help reform how Parliament is elected and conducts itself. Because ultimately, we keep saying it, Parliament belongs to the people, but it's not really what happens all that often. Too often votes happen and then it goes a different direction. I regret that we didn't follow that through because it offers legitimacy to what's happening. The idea that parties are pushing one system or another for their own self-interest is diminished a bit if it comes from a group of citizens who are by their nature nonpartisan. I don't go as far as some of my colleagues did on direct democracy, Switzerland and some other countries that vote on every statute and piece of legislation that comes through. But I do believe that an enhanced citizen role could be very effective, especially the big contentious issues, how we elect parliaments, assisted dying, like some of the big moral conundrum type issues that parliamentarians seem to be ill-equipped, and certainly any issue that has partisan self-interest available, like voting, for example.
Sorry, but I'm not being facetious, but isn't that what the Senate was supposed to be? Right?
Do you know what John A.'s key argument for the Senate was? You know this, Lisa. It was to defend minority rights in Canada.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the question is, which minority was he referring to? And it was the wealthy class, because they were always, by definition, be in the minority. The Senate fulfills that role generally pretty well. It could be what you're talking about. It could be that gathering of Canadians. Maybe the reforms are better than they were, but inherently unelected, unaccountable, difficult to put a lot of when they put pushback on us in Parliament on bills that we had passed through, man, oh man, my democratic blood would boil over.
Especially money bills. Especially money bills.
Yeah.
But Lisa, why can't we ever meaningfully reform the Senate? Is it because of, like, we're both Maritimers, is it because the 3 maritime provinces are kind of fiercely defending their space there, or what do you think it is?
Well, we've got the reference went to the House of, the reference went to the Supreme Court of Canada to determine whether or not you could make the changes to the Senate that at the point in time the Conservative government wanted to make, which was to make it accountable and elected, and it was shot down. So if you can't change it through the House of Commons, it has to reform itself. And there's a little bit of self-interest going on there. They don't have to go out and hit the hustings. They're good till 75 until they change that, because 75 is the new 45.
Well, on that note, let's go to the next question.
All right, next we have one of our IFL Ryerson alumni, Talina.
Okay, hi everyone. I just had a question, and I hope it's not going into like a comment slash question, but I was thinking about this whole title, so cross collaboration, and how, like for me, I kind of struggle around if I have an interest, a personal interest, etc., that it's hard for me to kind of see where the other person is coming from. And especially if it's something that's deeply meaningful to me. So if I think about that and I think about the intersectionality, so me as a Black woman and what the construct and stereotypes around that, and then juxtapose that with also being in Parliament, and then kind of thinking about like, oh, should I say this or should I not say this, and who do I reach out to? I'm just wondering if actually both of you can kind of guide me along around that process. And it's very interesting. I think, Nathan, when you said the status of women, how it was very contentious. I'd just like to hear more of your thoughts around that and what you think, why that was. Thank you.
Well, I'll start off. And it's a really tough question, Talina, because you're right. I mean, if you have the passion to be an elected member of Parliament because there's something that is really important to you, and you want to affect change in that area, it's about getting other people to go along with you, because you have to build the base around you. I give you one example for what it's worth. One of the most intriguing friendships that I've seen come out of Parliament is the one between Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott. And Jane Philpott thanks publicly, privately, personally, she talks about it all the time, how Jody Wilson-Raybould has educated her and made her aware of things that she was not aware of in her life. And as a result, she's become a champion. And it has fundamentally changed the way that she looks at issues and the way that she makes decisions. And that came from a lot of conversations. Would you say that Jody Wilson-Raybould has a point of view on Indigenous issues? Absolutely. I mean, she was chief for so long, and she's so well versed, and she probably has figured all out already what we should be doing, and it's just a matter of getting it into place. But did she get frustrated because other people weren't with her? Nope. What she sought to do was to educate those around and have relationships. So that's the collaboration, and it's slow and it's a process, but building as many champions as you can around you for whatever cause that's important to you is the name of the game when it comes to politics. Politics is persuasion. You persuade people to vote for you. You persuade your government to put in certain provisions. You persuade people to vote in favor of what your position is or what your idea is. And that would be the only thing I could offer as an example. I can't give you advice, but I can offer an example of something that I saw that has actually worked.
I'll pass on advice that was given to me that I thought was helpful. Someone early on said you need to be hard on the issues but soft on people. That you can drive away at things. And at one point in a town nearby, Ian will remember this story. A young man, Ian Bush, was died in police custody after drinking a beer in a parking lot at a hockey game. Ended up 30 minutes later dead in police custody. So a part of my effort was on public oversight of the police. That police investigating police was wrong to me. I grew up in Toronto. I watched too much of it happen in my family and thinking about what this meant. I had to get real curious about people on the other side of that issue who fundamentally disagreed with me. Many of them police officers saying, you don't trust us, et cetera, et cetera. And but at first I was not curious. I guess that's why I can tell this story now. At first I was determined that this is the right policy. It's got to happen. And I took tons of crap for my position. You're a cop hater. You don't trust the police, et cetera, et cetera. But in my heart, I knew I was right, that public confidence in the police would be enhanced if there was public oversight of the police. That was in my mind. And justice may happen a little more frequently than it was. But if I lost my curiosity, my ability to understand my opponent, not my enemy, my opponent on that issue, some of which were in Lisa's party, who really disliked the way I talked about these things. I had to get curious about why they were so fiercely against the idea of public oversight of our police institutions. What were their fears? And until I could do that, the campaign really didn't get much juice. Once we had as Lisa said, a lot of good people around us building it. Ian's mom, Linda Bush, was incredible. We have versions of public oversight of our police forces across this country now. Not perfect, but a lot better than where it was 15 years ago when Ian was killed. So yeah, curiosity, even in the face of somebody fundamentally disagreeing with the worldview you have and the solution you may have to the challenges we face.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Sorry, so I'm going to give our final question to Jerry.
Well, I'm looking at the clock and we're actually probably very short, but I'll make it a really quick one. On this idea of collaboration, we had heard a really great story from Lisa about Nathan calling her up early in her ministerial career. What would be the one piece of advice on collaboration that you would offer to somebody who maybe finds themselves newly elected in the next cycle or two? What would the one thing be that you tell them to do that could really help them be a collaborator rather than a divider when they get there?
Lisa, you want to take a shot at that?
I will, yeah, I will. First of all, we've been telling really great stories of positive ways in which people have collaborated. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that there's 338 people that sit in the House of Commons, and some of them are just flat out jerks, quite frankly, and you don't want to be around them. And as a result, don't beat yourself up if you can't collaborate with someone who really is, not a great human being that you want to spend time with. And you wonder, how the hell did they get elected? But nonetheless, I digress. So don't kill yourself in terms of needing to collaborate even with those who are clearly not in the same headspace as you are. The fact that you're listening to this today indicates that you are going to be one who seeks to try to go out and actually develop those kinds of relationships across partisan lines. They're very helpful. I would say this, and it's a practical issue, and I'm sorry for being very pragmatic in how to approach it. Join as many friendship groups that are multi-partisan as possible, and take advantage of the social situations that you will find yourself in. If you're asked by your whip to take a trip with other members of opposite parties, take the trip with other members. One of the great places where I ended up getting to know Randall Garrison quite well, Nathan, was when we went to Israel. And that was, that's a life-changing kind of trip that you take as parliamentarians, and it bonded us together, and we disagree on many things, we agree on many things. So that would be the advice in collaboration. Seek out the areas where you are thrown together by structure, because you have to all be there, and join those friendship groups and try to work. But as well, don't beat yourself up if you don't necessarily fall in love with the other person on the other side.
I had very little discipline sometimes, but I did have one piece of discipline, which is I had a list. And I won't tell you the name of the list because it's quite offensive, but there was only at any time allowed to be 2 MPs on my list that I just couldn't be in the same room with.
Yep.
And so if I was really ticked off with somebody, I had to make the decision, do I put them on the list? Because again, there's only 2. And that meant I had to remove someone from the list. And I maintained that sort of you can't pick a fight with everybody. You can't get ticked off because somebody shut you down at a committee every day. Somebody mentioned it earlier about walking across the aisle. And then I take this in virtual ways as well as the physical parliament, that there is this separation between the parties.
2 swords.
And if I wasn't walking across the aisle, right, 2.5 sword lengths, if I wasn't going across and sitting down in the government or other opposition party benches once a week, then there was something wrong with my own disposition to work. Because the physical walking over to somebody else's space, sitting down and saying, I got, something to talk about, nothing to talk about, didn't matter. That was really important. And I imagine that in all workplaces, right? Like, it's such positional stuff in politics. There's clear lines, there's parties and teams, but in every workspace, bureaucracy, a party, whatever, there are teams. And the ability to go into the other office, sit down without an agenda, and make sure you're talking to people who you don't necessarily align with all the time is great. But Lisa's advice on not killing yourself and trying to get at those people that ended up on my list, I didn't spend a great deal of time hurting myself for not getting along with people who were just kind of bad human beings. It was strange, Lisa, how they got elected, but they did. Some of them multiple times, and I'm sure their mothers loved them
And
dearly.
some of them are still there.
Not to name any names.
Ian, would you like to say something to wrap up, and then I'll give some thanks?
Yeah, I would just say a couple of things quickly. First of all, many, many years ago, I was going to say a lifetime ago, but for most of you who are on this call, it's more than a lifetime ago. I went to university to do political science, and I'm reminded as I listen to Lisa and Nathan today why I did that. You guys represent the best part of politics, the fact that for you it is a calling, was a calling, and just to hear how thoughtful you are is just really inspiring, even for me. And so thank you for that. I would also say that, I thought the conversation about cross-party collaboration would be more about political strategy, but when you hear it coming out of your mouths, it's more about personal warmth and intellectual curiosity and trying to get things done. And I think that that's a really good message as well. If there was a negative in this sort of 2.5 hours, it's this image I have in my head that Nathan Cullen goes to the community pool in a Speedo. But I will try to get over that. So thank you.
I make it work. I got elected 5 times. 5 times, Speedo never hurt me.
Anyway,
no,
yes,
it hurt the people around you, Nathan.
That's true. That is true.
So thanks, Jerry, for including me in this. And so yeah, it's been fantastic.
Well, that leaves it to me to thank everyone, both our participants, our panelists, and Ian for moderating. I should have mentioned at the start that in any situation associated with UBC, we have to refer to Ian as Dr. Hanomansing, as we gave him an honorary degree a year or 2 ago.
Yeah, so didn't earn it, just got
one
it.
opportunity where he gets to use the title. So Dr. Hanomansing, thank you. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Lisa, very much for your contributions. Discussion. I will leave with the promo that we're going to have more of these discussions. June 11th is our next. We'll put some stuff up near the end, and we'll kind of leave those up for a minute as everyone leaves. But also that we'll be doing stuff like this in person in 2021. And so won't it be great if you can see people like Lisa and Nathan right up front and come and ask your questions afterward, as well as kind of take on some of the roles that they play in some of the simulation activities we do. So we really hope that that circumstances allow us to do that in next summer, and that we can see people just like this, including perhaps these ones, in our spaces next summer. So Megan will pop those slides up, and we'll just start to thank everybody, so people can leave at their leisure, but you can check those slides. And again, a deep felt thanks to Lisa, Nathan, and Ian. So goodbye, everyone, and thanks for joining us. See you soon.